Hey Nerd Fam! This one is for the Warhammer nerds, specifically Warhammer history nerds and White Dwarf nerds. Basically, I have been reading my old copies of White Dwarf. I've recently started collecting, even older than when I started, which was about 24 years ago. I am working my way backwards. So rather than collecting the new stuff, I am collecting old stuff and having a great time with it. And today and yesterday, maybe even also the day before, I've been lingering over it. I've been reading White Dwarf 200. It's a massive bumper edition because they did a whole special thing for the 200th issue of White Dwarf and really celebrated in it, which was nice. It was the biggest issue ever at the time. It's from August 1996. I absolutely love this kind of era of Warhammer history because to me it all feels so human. It strikes a really nice balance point, I think, in Warhammer history where they were big enough to have sort of the benefits that come from having a larger business. So being able to hire a whole team of people, being able to bring on some of the best fantasy artists in the industry, that kind of thing that only comes with size. You don't get that as like a tiny self-employed company. But they weren't yet kind of vibing super corporate. You really still feel that there's people writing this, and actually one of the nice things about it being the celebratory 200 edition is that they did a whole load of meet the staff stuff. So at the time there were 6 people on the White Dwarf staff, and they did a little interview with each one of them, or just like a little half page with each person. And just, yeah, there's pictures of the staff in there. Like when there's an article, it quite often has a photo of the person who's written it. I noticed that there's a lot more credits than I really tend to see now. I mean, I don't get White Dwarf right now. I haven't got it for a while. I felt a bit, it was not my jam when I bought one a few years ago, and so I've been collecting the old stuff, so it might have changed. But I really noticed that the pages have like credit to the miniatures designers, sometimes credit to the artists, mention of members of staff, credit to the writers, that kind of thing, in a much more personal way that has sort of pictures and stuff that makes it feel very human. And maybe I'm getting older than I look, but they all seem really young, which I guess they're not now because this is a while ago now. Another thing I love about this sort of era of Warhammer and White Dwarf is that it's so colourful, it's so full of art, it's so vibrant. It still has like that element of grimdarkness that we love about 40k and things, but it also has that sort of old school fantasy vibe. Not like cartoons, but like not necessarily photorealism either. Kind of, yeah, different art styles obviously throughout it, but yeah, it feels to me like there's a sort of a humanity and an innocence to it that is very different from the corporate vibes that I think we get nowadays, which obviously, you know, we get a lot of content put out, like a large scale corporation. I've said it before that although there are downsides of Games Workshop becoming, well, Warhammer becoming a large mega corporation vibe, it does have advantages in that they can employ a lot of staff, they can produce a lot of miniatures, they can produce a lot of content, like a lot more than a small team would be able to produce. So there are advantages, but I do love this vibe. I wish I could show you all the pictures in this. Oh my god, it's the visuals really that is what is so amazing about it. Obviously the text is great, but the visuals are so wonderful. But copyright, so no can do, sorry guys. But this beautiful cover art is by Wayne England, and it was commissioned specially for this issue for White Dwarf for their 200th anniversary. And they actually did an entire 8-page interview with him in this issue, talking to him about his artistic process and his sort of experience as a fantasy artist. Loads of different example pictures of his art, which is really cool to read. And again, really nice to see that sort of credit and spotlight being shone on the artists themselves. They also did a White Dwarf mini that was sculpted by Colin Dixon and painted by Mark Jones. And again, they credit those people. They have a little bit of information about Colin and his sculpting process for the miniature that went alongside this issue. For some reason, it's an episode in my head. And yeah, they also did a scenario where you can play, including the White Dwarf. So they have magic items for him and a whole, which is cards, like physical. I can't show you. Can I show? I guess you've seen this before. Magic item cards. Brilliant. So brilliant. Little, oh, there's back. Yeah, magic item cards and a profile for playing the White Dwarf character, information about that character and the background of his lore, and then this scenario game that you can play with the White Dwarf going up against the Black Dwarf, which is a Chaos Dwarf character that I hadn't really heard about before, which was an interesting read because Chaos Dwarves disappeared before I started Warhammer, so it's always nice to just, yeah, find out a bit more about them. It's fun also seeing stuff as like new releases and news that obviously is really old now, like very much old hammer. So they've got in this one Codex Chaos, Wood Elves, some new Necromunda stuff. There was a lot of Necromunda in this, which was really fun to see. Lots of Necromunda and also some Space Hulk, a fun Space Hulk scenario between Space Wolves and Gene Stealers, which was again really fun to see because that wasn't really around so much, I don't think, when I was first starting. So it's nice to see that little bit of history from it. I know that for some of you that history is, yeah, how you started or even when you were established playing. So I'd love to hear your memories about it if you were playing at this time, what you remember from this time, how it was different to gaming now. Yeah, what's your nostalgia stories? One of the other things that came out in this issue, or like it's advertised as coming out in this issue, is the How to Make Wargames terrain book, which I was so excited to see because that is actually one of my favourite ever Games Workshop books. I actually have it here. I love it so much. It's one of my absolute all-time favourites. I cleared out loads of my collection, including when I was ill and giving loads of stuff away that I really shouldn't have given away. And I thought that I had shipped this one out and I hadn't. I found I hadn't. So I'm so excited to still have this and be able to go through this. Obviously, I want to build all the projects in here. If you haven't seen it before, this is back in the day. So released around then, but still around when I was gaming, I think. And at the time they weren't really making much terrain, so they made this book on how to make your own terrain out of household items. My absolute favourite has always been these cactuses that are like a lump of polystyrene with cocktail sticks stuck in them as spikes, and they're just fantastic. They're just so good. And not only are they in this book here, but I found them in this White Dwarf used as scenery in an official battle report. So absolutely love that. Some other bits I really enjoyed in this issue, they printed a letter from a gamer who had written in a letter kind of in the style of an Imperial report with a photo of him in the jungle with White Dwarf, which was brilliant. I don't know if he's still around. Tom Savage, is he still in the community? We need to know. It's a while ago, so maybe he is or isn't gaming, but hashtag famous. I can't show you, but excellent photo, Tom. Love it. Also, a really interesting article with Dreadnoughts. They had a new Chaos Dreadnought come out at this time, and that was interesting because Dreadnoughts aren't something I really know a huge amount about, and this article was talking about how although Imperial Dreadnoughts is a great honour to be made a Dreadnought, that's something preserved really for the greatest battle heroes when they're too wounded to continue. In the Chaos Space Marines, certainly at this time, I don't know about now, the law was that like they didn't like it. Like they didn't want to become a Chaos Space Marine. It was not a Chaos Space Marine, a Chaos Dreadnought. It was basically torture for them to be sort of trapped away, sensory deprivation away from, I think it said something about like feeling a bolter in your hand and like, yeah. I mean, it did say about them going into a psychotic rage, and as someone who has experienced psychosis, we need to work on the use of the word psychotic in a very medically inaccurate way, but that's across all culture, and I think it's still going on now, so can't blame them for having that problem then. I guess I'll probably talk about that at some point, but yeah, that is not this video. The adverts in this are lovely. They are sort of one page, and then it's a particular army and like different pictures of the units, and it's really fun because there's not that much. There's sort of like 4 different options for each army and maybe a book. So I really like that, and obviously they're old models. So for example, the Tyranids page has, back in the day when the Tyranids had a hand holding a sword as opposed to like, you know, an arm turned into a sword. That was the Tyranid warriors. I love those models. They're so fun. So they're particularly good. And I also love the Death Guard one, or I think, were they called Death Guard in this? I can't remember if they were called Death Guard yet, but they were Death Guard. Basically, it was just Plague Marines and some demons, Plague Bearers, Nurglings. They came up a little bit in this. So Death Guard is my main army. So it was really exciting to see some of the like earlier point of Nurgle, whereas now there's quite a wide range of units for Nurgle that are all specialised. You can field them as their own whole specialised army. From what I saw in this, there was pretty much just Plague Marines, Plague Bearers, Nurglings. They came up in a battle report, and the Nurgle demons did pretty well, so yeah, proud of them. From what it hasn't listed in here, it seems like there was quite a lot going on at that time period. It references a lot of like battle days in stores and painting competitions in stores, events being held nationwide that were then like, you know, where they combine all the results to dictate what happens next in the campaign, that kind of thing. And also a really cool thing where they did a battle tour, which was members of staff going around towns that didn't yet have a Games Workshop. And it's basically this list of like community halls and schools and those kind of places where they would do these days. It doesn't say a lot about them, but presumably like show and tell Warhammer days where they effectively are like, come everyone, join the hobby, become addicted to plastic crack, which sounds brilliant to me. I think that sounds wonderful, and I don't know if they're still doing that anymore. I would be interested to know if anyone knows if that's something that still goes on or if that's something that's more organised within the community. One of the things I love the absolute most about sort of early White Dwarfs and early Warhammer stuff is a vibe that really comes across in this, where when they're doing their battle reports and listing rules and stuff like that, they really have this emphasis on being sensible and not being a dick. And like they address it in one of the articles in this actually, where they're talking about basically power playing, people sort of like finding that loophole where something hasn't been banned in the rules but it's clearly way overpowered and isn't meant to be the case. And they're talking about basically don't do that, and kind of staying true to the background and the theme of it, of the game. And yeah, like there's a real vibe of like making it a game and having fun, and that comes up again and again in all of the interviews, all of the things the staff are saying, all of the battle reports. It's just, yeah, a really nice vibe. As an example, they have a 16-page battle report, Orcs and Chaos against Abaddon. And one of the things that Jarvis Johnson says about choosing his army, my starting point had been to pick an army more along the lines of what kind of stuff would you find in an orc village, that rather than what items will give me the greatest chance of victory. Picking an army in this way is a lot of fun, and I'd recommend giving it a try. And then he talks about, yeah, like how he put this army together and how he sort of, rather than going, okay, right, these are my tactics, how am I most likely to win? He's talking about sort of like, yeah, he's got like what would be around in a village, and like there's the mech workshop, and there's all these kind of like, yeah, he's really gone into the lore to build the army rather than power playing it. And Andy, what's his face? Hang on. Andy Chambers says pretty similar thing actually. I picked the Chaos Space Marine squads I liked the best rather than the ones I knew would be most effective. Can we all play like that, please? I love doing that. Pick models you like. Pick stuff that's background that you like, because the thing is the rules change. So you'll just have to change your army the next time all the rules change anyway. So pick stuff you like. Have fun. And it's just really nice to see them saying all that stuff in the sort of like official publication. Along similar lines, they have a couple of times where they're talking about basically taking the rules that are official from Games Workshop and playing with them and creating your own scenarios and stuff. So this comes up several times across this. Pretty much every kind of like report that they're talking about, they're sort of saying, oh, you can do it like this, but basically like be sensible, discuss it with your opponent and come up with something that works. They talk about house rules, and they actually have an entire article all about how to convert your character from Warhammer Quest, which seems to be a Warhammer role-playing game. So they have an adventurer and they're much higher level. They basically end up being special characters, and it's all about how to convert your character from your roleplay game into a fieldable Warhammer character, how to sort of like points value it up, how to convert the rules across. So it's literally like a whole article about how to invent your own rules and stat lines and that kind of thing. And they have another scenario. Well, I can't remember the exact details. There was a thing, it was basically, there's this unit of walking wounded in this particular scenario. I think it's a dwarf scenario in here, dwarfs versus orcs. But there's these walking wounded, and a certain percentage of your troops from all of your units get like allocated as they've been wounded before the battle, and then they form together into one unit. So for this particular scenario, you have your army and then just random models out of your army form together into one unit of walking wounded, and then they basically say, well, yeah, it's obviously going to be chaos in combat because they're all armed differently and all their stat lines are different and everything is different, but it's just up to you and your opponent to sort of figure it out and be sensible and make it work. Absolute chaos. I love it. Another thing I love so much about looking back on White Dwarfs and generally Warhammer books from this sort of time period, any of that early time period, is looking at all the Golden Demon and heavy metal stuff and seeing just like how different it is from now. And this is a great issue for that. They've got a whole article by, who was it by? By Mike McVeigh, all about dioramas for Golden Demon. So they have information about sort of like Golden Demon and the categories of which categories you can enter, and a whole article by him about what he's looking for when judging dioramas. And then he's built this example diorama to show you all these different concepts working. It's really cool, and it's really fun seeing how different it is now. Like the winning Warhammer vehicle on the games day that they feature in this is an Elder Wraithlord, and it's beautiful, and it's very like, it very much looks like painting of this time period. It is a lovely model, but compared to the competition standard now, the difference is insane. Like what has happened over the intervening decades is phenomenal, like the difference we're looking at now. And I really do look back at like when I was sort of 10 and first starting Warhammer and looking at the Golden Demon and being like, oh, I want to win a Golden Demon now. I feel like I could have a crack now at winning a Golden Demon back then, but no chance of winning one now. So I need to time warp back to get my Golden Demon. But it's nice to see those examples, and it's a really fun article. I've got some, they're in the other room. I've got some like old Golden Demon winner catalogues that they used to do as inserts. I think they were inserts with White Dwarf. Can't remember, but they're fab. Just like pictures of all the winners. I think I've got like 2002, 2003. They were some of my earliest games days. They're brilliant. I'd love to collect those for every year if anyone has any going spare / sellable, you know, for my collection. One of the other miniatures that gets released in this is Fabulous Bill. And I loved seeing him come up in this because the miniature and especially the artwork that went alongside it is so similar to Fabulous Bile as what is currently the most recently released Fabulous Bile. And it's just really cool seeing like it's pretty much the same but upgraded. He's not a character I know a lot about, so it was really interesting to learn more about him. I bought the miniature of him when he came out most recently because he looked badass, and I actually thought he looked Nurgle, and it turns out he isn't at all Nurgle. Well, I guess you could argue he's, yeah, his own undivided thing, but he's not specifically Nurgle. But anyway, if you like Fabulous Bill, there's some good background in this particular issue on sort of where he comes from. couple of other bits that I like of this era before we finish up with some White Dwarf history, which is really exciting. They've got mail order, and you can order specific bits, like not just a pack, but like you could order just like some dude's gun, or like there's a particular, it's an orc tractor in here, and I want the control panel, and I would have been able to just order only the control panel. That's so freaking cool. I wish we could do that now with specific bits, because yeah, I know lots of people who are like, well, that model is, you know, £80 and I just want the wings, not pointing any fingers. But you know, you've all been there and done it, or been at least very, very tempted. So it would be so cool to still be able to do that. I also noted in this that there was a special thing they ran with this, a limited edition number of White Dwarf t-shirts that were, I think, for like a limited number of subscribers, and I want to know if there's any of them still out there. What is the oldest Warhammer t-shirt or item of clothing that you own, or that someone you know owns? How much of those like old collectible t-shirts are still around, and can I have them, please? So probably my favourite bit till last, if you are a White Dwarf nerd and a Warhammer history nerd, this issue has such a good article about White Dwarf history, because it's the 200th anniversary edition and they were really excited about, and it is so great. It has pictures of like old White Dwarf covers. The very first White Dwarf cover, clearly one day I will have it in my collection. I'm going to collect them all, by the way, that's my plan. I did have a very large number, then I went a bit crazy, gave a lot of them away, and now I'm collecting them again. So eventually I will collect them all, mostly the old ones, but eventually I'll get around to the new ones, just when I've got all the old ones, but that's going to take a while. So here's some fun bits. The first issue of White Dwarf was 1997, and it was originally White Dwarf, the science fiction and fantasy games magazine. It had its first colour cover the next year, issue 7, became monthly at issue 32. After 10 years, it was issue 90. So what I found possibly the most interesting in this history of White Dwarf is that the first Warhammer article was not until issue 45. And the first Warhammer 40k was not until issue 93. 93 issues before 40k even got mentioned. And since then, it's basically been in every single issue and it's like the main thing. But yeah, I really am excited to at some point start collecting those much, much earlier issues and see what was in them, because I do actually love like fantasy, sci-fi, roleplay, like all that whole vibe. So I don't really mind what's in them, they'll be fun. Definitely a great article if you are interested in White Dwarf history, and in general this one is a great magazine if you're interested in White Dwarf history. I also wish to know, asking the community, in issue 95 there was a flexi disc, not sure what that is, but it had music on it, so I'm guessing some kind of CD vibe. A music disc with White Dwarf. Does anyone still have a copy of that? What was on it? All it says is that it was heavy metal, and I really like metal music and I really like Warhammer, so I want to know what was on that disc. Did anyone get it at the time? Does anyone know what was on it? Does anyone have issue, was it 95, whatever I just said, and be able to find more information about it? I want to know, please tell me. And with that, that is my review of this White Dwarf. Done. I just had many thoughts and wanted to share them with people who actually like also care way too much about this stuff. If you have any thoughts or anything, let me know, because yeah, I love this stuff. Love you lots, Ned Bam. Mwah.